Hey guys, so today I am going to address two main questions that I get every time I make Char Siu Baos. Number one is, how do I get my baos white? Because after I steam them, they always turn yellow. Number two is, how do I get my Char Siu Baos to crack open just like they do in restaurants, just like they do when I am having dim sum? And the second one took a while, actually. I did a ton of research in books, online, watched a lot of videos, did a lot of translations of like Chinese websites just to get this recipe down, which I will be sharing with you guys a little bit later. So let's go back to question one first. Number one, why are my baos yellow? Clear answer is because you are using unbleached flour. So for a lot of baos in Hong Kong, a lot of baos in Chinese restaurants, that bread is made from very refined, very bleached flour, and bleaching does something to the flour as well that makes it kind of like a little bit more able to trap in the air. It makes it a lot more light, but of course it gets rid of a lot of the nutrients and a little bit of structural changes as well. So it really depends on whether you guys value the aesthetics over, I guess, like potential health benefits or not. But if you're looking to make white bao bread like this, then go with your bleached, super bleached flour, and you're going to get that result. Another thing about the flour of Char Siu Baos is the dough of Char Siu Bao is different from your typical like vegetable filled bao in that it is made with cake flour. So it has less protein in it, making it, it's going to be a little bit more fluffy, it's going to be a little bit more tender. Some people kind of describe the dough of Char Siu Bao to be even cake-like. It's a little bit sweeter, less bread-like, and kind of, it reminds you of cake. And so that is why they'll use cake flour in it as opposed to your normal like all-purpose or bread flour. Now, where do you find ultra bleached cake flour? So it's very difficult here in the UK and also in the European Union because I don't really think that they do bleached flour here. I had read somewhere that that was not really allowed, probably for like nutritional aspects and whatnot. So they only have unbleached flour here. So the question is, where do you get super bleached cake flour? What I ended up doing, and what you guys might want to do as well, depending on where you live, is if you go into an Asian grocery store, there is always like a flour, baking soda, baking powder section where they have these bao bread mixes that are kind of pre-mixed for you. And usually it's very bleached white flour along with like a tapioca starch or cornstarch or something to make it lighter, and very similar to cake flour. So that is actually where I had to find my like ultra bleached cake flour for this recipe, and it turned out really well, worked really, really well. Just be careful to see whether they have added additional kind of baking agents to it. Usually a little bit of baking powder should be fine for this. So number one, that is solved on how to get your baos white. It has nothing to do with like vinegar. Some people think like putting vinegar in is going to make it white. And vinegar, cleans things, but does not bleach things. So, and I've tried it. So that's that. So number two, how do you get your baos to crack? I have done a ton of recipes, and every now and then, I get the slight crack, but I haven't really been able to master it. Basically, what I found are some pretty nifty restaurant tricks on how to make this work. And of course, with restaurant tricks, it's really more for aesthetics. I don't necessarily know how healthy everything is, but I will share that with you guys. So in order to get your Char Siu Baos to crack, to puff open, to make kind of that like beautiful floury crack, is a couple of things. So number one, ammonium bicarbonate. I think that you guys have seen it before in my pineapple buns recipe. It is something that Chinese bakers put in their baked goods to get it like lighter, to get it fluffier. It functions a lot like baking soda, but it really helps things crack really well. And it is used because it doesn't usually, it doesn't leave that same, kind of that base alkaline-y flavor that baking soda can do. Be careful using it though, because it is ammonium bicarbonate, so you guys know how that smells. Like any ladies or gentlemen who have bleached their hair or done something to their hair, that kind of ammonium smell, that is present. And because it's in powder form, you have to be kind of really careful. You know, make sure that you have windows open. I mean, it's not usually that bad, but powder has a tendency to fly everywhere. You don't really want to breathe this stuff in because it'll sting for a little bit. So that is number one. Number two is you really want to get a reaction to start happening in the bao, like opposite reactions, so that as soon as you put it into the steamer, you crank up the heat, that whole thing starts to kind of like poof up, bloom, and then split. That is achieved through a mix of vinegar in the dough, as well as alkaline water. So alkaline water like kansui, like potassium carbonate water. Usually you can find that in the Asian grocery stores as well. I will put a link down to all of these ingredients down below. But that you'd usually use it to make things like ramen. Alkaline water adds snap usually to things, like when you add it to dough, it gives it a little bit more snap, or when you add it to noodles, it gives it a little bit more snap. The alkaline water obviously is kind of an opposing force with the vinegar. So when you add it in all at the last minute, basically it's like the dough is just very active. So that when you do put it into the steamer, the dough is actually super activated already. Like it's ready to go, it's ready to rise, it's ready to just like puff up when you bring it to that heat. So those are really the two basic things. And when I put all of this together, all of the baos, they just puffed up, they just cracked amazingly. And this was a trick that I feel nobody online, at least in the Western online audience, could give me. I didn't see it in any books, I didn't see it on any shows. And a lot of people, you know, they claim that, oh, the crack comes from the folds, which is true, but if you don't put the ammonium bicarbonate, if you don't put in the alkaline water and the vinegar, there's also a certain amount of fermentation involved.
You have the fermentation, you have the ammonium bicarbonate, you have the alkaline water, and the vinegar kind of
going at it with one another to make this happen. And if you're not comfortable using the ammonium bicarbonate, just substitute it for baking soda. Because some people are more comfortable just cooking, obviously, with that. You're not gonna get as big of cracks, or you might not get cracks at all. So I did a bao where I didn't fold it at all. I just kind of like made a circular dough ball and I steamed that, and it kind of like cracked a little bit up top, but it didn't really crack at all. So the folding did have something to do with it. If I folded it really tight where the creases were very prominent, like I really like bent it in there and there were prominent creases, that tended to be where the baos cracked, where there were creases with my fold. And I liked that, but it kind of felt less organic. What I really wanted was the stuff that you see in dim sum restaurants or at stores, where it was kind of like, it's almost like a Y crack, where it'll crack and kind of form a Y and break up into 3 parts. So how you do that is when you make those folds, because you essentially kind of make an accordion shape and then close up the bao, when you make those folds, don't make them as pronounced. So don't make as many of them. You can fold them, but don't go crazy and bend everything. Like let the bao kind of relax as you fold it. So not too many folds and not to have them be too indented. So that is really, my life's questions about baos have definitely been solved, and this is a segment that I wanted to do with you guys and explain everything for the longest time. So I hope you guys enjoyed this recipe and that it answers any of the questions that you guys have as well. If you have any more, definitely put that in the comments down below. I really wanted to share these tips and these secrets with you guys, so I hope you guys enjoy. Okay, so we're gonna start off with the starter for this bao first to get everything nice and fluffy and tender. And this is the bao mix that I was talking about. White flour usually has a packet of yeast in it, and it's actually mixed in with some tapioca starch. So it's very much like you would make cake flour with. So I have a 1/4 cup of cake flour to that, and then to that, I'm going to add a 1/2 teaspoon of yeast. A recipe is going to be all down below. I'm adding 1 1/4 teaspoons of sugar to this. I think it's better to use granulated if you are trying to keep this bao white. So just kind of mix that around, and afterwards I'm going to add 3 to 4 tablespoons of warm water to this. And anybody that's done kind of like a starter with me before knows that you want this mixture to be fairly wet. So if you find that it's a little bit on the drier side, just add an extra tablespoon of water and it'll be fine. Right, so you're just gonna let this sit overnight, and then afterwards it'll start bubbling up like this because you have activated the yeast and given it the sugars that it needs to grow big. So add about a half a cup of warm water to this, and I always dissolve everything and make sure that it's all mixed in before I add in an additional 1 3/4 cup of cake flour. So if towards the end you're finding that it's a little bit dry, just add like 1 or 2 tablespoons of water at a time before you let the dough rest for another 8 hours. Okay, so let's get ready to roll. So we're gonna put in all of our starter, which has developed some really nice flavor and texture as well. And then to that, I'm going to add in a little over a 1/4 cup of sugar. And at first, the mixture is going to look really dry, but the sugar is going to actually add a lot of moisture to the dough. So later on, it actually starts looking a little bit wet and sort of runny. Now I'm preparing the dry ingredients. So I have another cup of cake flour along with about 2 tablespoons of wheat starch or cornstarch. I'm gonna add in 1 tablespoon of baking powder as well as about 3/4 teaspoon of the ammonium bicarbonate. I'm gonna go ahead and add the wetter ingredients before I add the flour mixture. So I have a 1/3 teaspoon of alkaline water, and then to that, 1 tablespoon of vegetable shortening. This looks like butter, but that's just kind of how they do it here. And then finally, about a 1/2 teaspoon of rice vinegar will go in. And then just mix that all together until it's nice and combined. So you can see that with the addition of the sugar, in addition to a little bit of the shortening, it has turned this mix more into a batter than a dough. So just put in all of the dry ingredients all at once, start at low, and then turn the speed up to about medium. And I would say knead it for about 7 to 8 minutes up until you can see that the dough is nice and combined and well kneaded. So after about 7 to 8 minutes, it will look something like this, and you want to just turn it onto a floured surface and knead it for about, I'd say like 2 minutes, up until you get a nice smooth ball of dough. I will say at this time, the dough feels pretty good. Like it's still nice and soft, but it's not sticky to your hands, and it feels quite malleable. So as with most doughs that have been kneaded, you want to let it rest. I would say like 15 to 30 minutes so that the gluten has a chance to relax. And then after which, you want to divide this dough into 10 pieces. And this is a trick that I found online actually. Instead of rolling it into, a really long log, which can, sometimes be hard to do, just stick your fingers in the middle. You have like a nice big donut, and then stretch it out that way. Cut it in half first, and then each half into 5 pieces. So I'm just kind of kneading each piece into a circular shape, and then getting these into dough balls before I roll them out. It just makes the shape of rolling into a disc a lot easier. So just have a very light, damp cloth nearby, and I probably let these guys rest for another 5 minutes or so. So I have a steamer basket. I have some parchment paper that I've cut. So these are what I'm going to be putting the Char Siu Baos on. So that filling on the side I've actually made a ton of times, so I'm going to put that link onto the bottom and to the side. And what you want to do now is to roll about, I'd say like a 5-inch disc, concentrating on the edges being a little bit thinner than the center. And don't overdo it with the filling if this is your first time around. Just about 1 tablespoon or so should do. And remember how I talked about not having too many creases if you want kind of that nice organic look. So I would say fold no more than 7 to 8 folds, and you're just kind of doing an accordion shape, just folding and then squeezing, folding, squeezing, and then towards the end, giving it a little twist and pinching off the top. And then you have it there, put it on your parchment paper, and then let it rest until you finish the rest. Okay, so time for the steaming. As usual, we have the pot going on full blast, high heat, and you guys are going to steam these baos for right around 10 minutes, after which you get the most gorgeous baos. They are nice and cracked and exposing some of that red filling in the middle. And the baos, they're absolutely super soft, super tender, and kind of like cakey and bready at the same time. And there you guys go, the ultimate Char Siu Bao recipe. I really hope you guys enjoyed watching this and some of the information in the front, and hopefully that helped you solve some of the questions that you had about baos. I really think that this is restaurant quality stuff. I mean, it's so fluffy, it's cakey, it's sweet, and it's aesthetically just so gorgeous. So I hope you guys enjoyed the recipe. As usual, if you want to see more recipes like this, remember to hit that like and subscribe button, and I will see you all again next time. Bye!